Welcome to the Foundry, where leaders are forged daily. And now your host, George Roberts.
Welcome back, entrepreneurs. Each week we explore how entrepreneurship, leadership, and mindset play into success in the commercial real estate space. Today, we welcome Andy Mcmullen to the Foundry. Thanks for coming on the show, Andy.
Yeah, honored to be here. Thanks, George. Appreciate it. You don't mind people calling Gorgeous George, right? Does that embarrass you a little bit?
No, not at all. So that would be a reminder of where we met. So you probably saw me on a call with Dan Frydenberg.
It might have been, yeah.
Might have been.
Shout out to Dan.
Yeah, big shout out to Dan. So he gave me my my nickname, and that's a reminder I need to choose my gorgeous virtual background. So let's get that rolling.
Awesome. Good stuff, man.
All right. So let's just start by giving an opportunity to introduce yourself. Tell our audience, who is Andy Mcmullen?
Yeah, so I've been in this business, George, probably about 20 years. I kind of started off on as a broker. Okay, not great at it. Kind of evolved into some development, syndication. Really kind of got my ass handed to me. My first syndication almost blew up my whole business, and kind of was able to sneak back from there, and ultimately kind of evolved into multifamily investing probably about 2012. And then we kind of built out our team, invested in Southern California, Central California. And then when the rent control was enacted in California, we really started to kind of spread our wings, took a lot of our investors to the Southeast, really started to look into the built to rent trend in the Southeast. And so we're doing multifamily and built to rent mostly is our focus these days. And syndicating and co-sponsoring with other deals, other partners.
That's really exciting, Andy, because I hear a lot of great trends in there. I don't just want to get syndicators and multifamily people on the show. This build to rent thing is something I've been fascinated by for a very long time. A lot of people say, well, hey, the younger generations, they're not buying homes. So what do we do, right? We need places for people to live. And so if you have been watching the statistics, and I watch this every month, I like to look at the housing starts and take a look that it's going to be a very long time before we catch up to where we ought to be in terms of the number of housing units in this country. So we got to build a lot more multifamily, and we got to do some build to rent. Maybe you can start out by telling us, what are some of the trends that are feeding into this build to rent frenzy, and tell us how you've been doing in that line of business?
Yeah, so the big trend for me, I guess I should say the eye-opening trend was when I started to see how much of the smart money was going into this space, right? You had Blackstone coming in, and Lennar's now building not only their single family homes to sell, but they're building investing billions of dollars for built to rent. And then when you read the numbers, right, just that we're probably about 3.8 million units short, right, for housing units, and really we were only 2.5 million a couple years back. So you can see that we're not getting any better on that front. And so we kind of felt like, hey, there's an opportunity here. If we can get land that's inexpensive enough, in areas where impact fees are low enough, in areas where we kind of have a developer-friendly area, government, local government, municipalities, and where we can build inexpensive enough, then we've got a real chance to kind of bless a number of communities. And so we connected with one of our developer partners, and we're building now 100 units in Lafayette, Louisiana. We're about 8 units in that project, and then we've got another about 400 units. It's really about 40 acres entitled for another couple of projects. So I think the big attraction from just the macro level is that there's multiple exit strategies, right? We can build these, we can sell them as groups of 10. They're all individually platted to a smaller multifamily developer. And we consider it, George, horizontal multifamily, right? People think of it as single family built to rent, but it really is managed and operated just like a multifamily project would be operated. But on the exit, on the other side, we can build one at a time, rent them out, right? So we don't have to wait for C of O of the whole property. And then we can sell to either an institutional, a larger multifamily buyer, or smaller buyers if we so choose. So I can talk a little bit more about it, but I'll let it take a breath and see if there's anything that you find interesting in that, or we can move on.
Yeah, I love it. Actually, there's a lot of things I'd like to talk about. But before we get into some deeper issues, maybe just a quick contrast. So one of the things that surprised me as this build to rent trend has really gained legs and traction is I'm in a different world. Okay. So I'm also a builder out here in Michigan. My sister and brother-in-law are running a company that I helped them start. And we're building single family homes a little bit more on the high end, getting a little bit towards the very high end, custom end, luxury home end. And this is one of the richest areas in Michigan. We're talking about Oakland County. And I hear a lot of people kind of saying the opposite thing, that, hey, the only houses that get built today are your sort of luxury homes, your big homes, and the fancy homes. And we're not building homes for ordinary people. But I do hear a lot of people on the build to rent side saying, hey, we are able to build these things. It's beautiful. We got multiple exits and it's a great strategy. So how expensive are these homes, and how are you doing, say, out of the box vis-a-vis, say, the 1% rule?
Yeah, so we can build for about 130,000 a unit all in, right? So let's just say, I'm just giving you our last project. So we'll build about 125, that's including a pretty large contingency. So we can build all in about 100,000 30 a door. So 80 for horizontal for people that 80 for horizontal, which basically means after we've all done the infrastructure, we've got the sewers, we've got the streets, etc. Then we've got to build the actual building, right? And so we can get rents for these particular 1,200 really efficient builds. So you mentioned luxury. No, they're not luxury, but they're new, and they've got all the new appliances, and they got the big yards, and families can afford it at $1,600 to $1,800 a month in rent. And they got the dog park and the clubhouse in some cases, and we can put in kind of the smart tech. So a lot of people that are just newer families, or even people that can afford it, a huge segment, George, of this built to rent community or buyer or renter, resident, would be people of means, right? They make $150,000, but they don't have the same American dream that I did growing up, to have a home. They can buy businesses on their phone, and they don't necessarily care about having the white picket fence, but they do want stuff that's new. So I would say that's probably our range. The next project that we're going to be doing is a little bit a little bit higher end. Maybe we get 1,800 to 2,000 a unit in rent, but we have to give obviously a lot more amenities. We have to build in the pool and the clubhouse and a lot more kind of, the community amenities, I should say, and larger backyards. And that's kind of how we compete, by the way, with other single family rentals or apartment rentals is, they want their doggy door, right? We build that in, and usually that attracts a whole different resident.
Okay, so tell us about that other development. So you said that's a little fancier, and you're getting up to $2,000 rent per unit. And what are those, or what did those units go for?
What you mean? What are we purchasing? Right now, we're going through the entitlement process.
Oh, okay.
So right now we've got maybe we start in April, May on those two projects. So one's northern Louisiana and Gonzales, nice area there, and then Foley, Alabama. But yeah, so I think I think what's going to be interesting to see, and maybe your listeners care, or maybe they don't care. Maybe they've heard so much inflation talk and supply chain talk and all the rest of it. But I do find it kind of interesting now, in that we're seeing kind of lumber come back down a little bit, but then it could tick up. Appliances are definitely a little slower for us to get. I'm curious about on the luxury end what you're seeing, but there's a lot of underwriting now that we've had, it's a good thing that we had 20% of contingency, because we're going to burn through part of that. And the thing I do like about built to rent, or just development in general, is that we're getting our loan on draws for the amount of units that we complete. So if, costs get out of control, we can just pull in the reins, collect the rent and income on the existing ones, and then wait it out, But I am kind of curious about you. Are you seeing huge in cost increases where it makes it almost too difficult for you to build the luxury?
Well, absolutely. And we're not quite to the luxury end. I mean, it's not everything is marble and columns, but some really fancy, sort of getting towards that level. I want to say we have at least 10-foot ceilings and some pretty fancy stuff. But again, we have a different area, right? We're quite built up in Oakland County. These homes are going up in Troy. And so I gather there's a few things that are different here. I want to say your current project that you're into right now is in Lafayette, Louisiana. And you're talking about big yards, completely different approach, right? So partly it's where you're building that makes this lucrative. And then you mentioned, I think 2 or 3 times, the entitlement process, which I think is also very helpful. And I'd really appreciate it for those of us or those of us in our audience that are not quite as deep into development. Tell us what that is and how that helps you do what you're doing.
Yeah, so really we got an acquisitions team that basically needs to find, and there's hundreds and hundreds of plots of land that may work, but they've got to kind of fall into these categories, right? They got to be in an area where we've got amenities close by. They got to be, we've got to have an elementary school that's got to be an 8. Got to have impact fees, which I mean like taxes and then all the kind of additional taxes you would have when you go into any new development area. That's got to be low enough for it to make sense. And then you got to have local government that works for you. But basically the entitlement process is getting all of the ducks in a row in order to actually build that project. So that means getting approvals from the city. It means making sure that all of that, you've got the pools, etc., for rain runoff, that you're compliant with all the city regulations. You can go into more detail if you want, but basically that process, in order for you to get build ready, is going to be a few months, depending on the area. In California, it could be 3 years. I mean, we've got projects here that have taken 3 years, right? And that I think that kind of explains why some of our investors are like, hey, let's move over to the Southeast. I'd be curious to know what it is like for you in that part of Michigan. I imagine it's even a little tougher in some cases than the Southeast, especially because you're coming into neighborhoods, right? A lot of the stuff we're building is kind of in that path to progress where there is a lot of interest from local politicians to get this done. And so you really kind of have to pull those partnerships together. So by the time we get the entitlements done, now we're ready to go to the infrastructure phase. That's streets, sewers, all of that. That's another 4 months or so, 4 to 5 months for our projects. And then to build the projects, we're maybe 10 a month, something like that. So we'll build 6 to 10 a month. And so our project will be done, in that 18-month range.
Right. Well, you touched on a couple of times, rent control, regulations, ordinances, all these sorts of things, zoning, all these things really add on to the project. You mentioned that got you sort of out of the Southeast. You did ask me a question, so I should promise to answer that first. Yes, things can be tough out here in some of the richer counties. That's how it goes. Where there is money, people do have a lot of restrictions. They want to keep things nice, and it's all for the best reasons, or at least all the greatest intentions. As for what that does in general to real estate, or to the likelihood that there are going to be anybody willing to build anything for middle or lower income people, I can tell you it's a very negative impact. But do you have any stories or any other further opinions, or maybe some commentary, like help people understand Like, why does it cost so much to build a home? And you're saying 2 or 3 years, right? I mean, time is money. If you've got to stretch things out 2 or 3 years before you stick a shovel in the ground, obviously that's going to have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, so I live in San Diego, and I've spent most of my life in LA. That's kind of where we've had our first development project, was a live work project in Venice Beach. And I think that the difference is you've got so much power in the neighborhood councils in a lot of these communities, right? We've all kind of heard the NIMBY, not my backyard, right? And so when you're in an area where there is a lot of kind of roadblocks, there's a lot of maneuvering that takes place. And remember, you're not on your timeline, you're on the local politician's timeline, you're on the neighborhood council's timeline. You have to have your kind of town halls to discuss. And then if you've got to change something about the elevations of your project or parking, there's studies for environmental and so I don't want to bore your audience with all of that, but just imagine that if you're doing that in a very strict state like California, that you should add on, 4 to 6 months on top of each sitting that you've got to get approved. And then maybe you get to the end and it's still not approved. So one of my mentors was trying to build a Target in Santa Monica, and it would have been great for the community. I think eventually that they did, Santa Monica, California. But it was a 3-year project, got all the way till the city council vote, right? And all leanings were, yeah, this is going to be approved. It's great. All of the parking is going to basically help mitigate parking because, so I'm going on about the story. But the reason I'm making this point is 3 years of my mentor's life. And in one day, one council member who may or may not have been informed makes a decision and blows the whole project. There's some municipalities in the South that are different than that. They don't have that same kind of political power. And so you can get things done more reasonably, let's say. So I tell people this: imagine if your Lorena Gonzalez tells Elon Musk, hey, F Elon Musk and his 36,000 families. Like, that speaks a lot about how politicians in California feel about entrepreneurship, which, and we talk about mindset, George, like, imagine dealing with that as, I got my close friends in development in San Diego. Imagine dealing with that mindset, like we're the black hat. So anyways, did I go on like a soapbox? I don't know. Maybe we
I actually asked you to, Andy. So I'm glad you did, because I think people need to know, and I'm not really here to tell people what to believe, but I think people really do need to know that there's two sides of the story, right? You want to have zoning. You want to make sure that you don't have a 300 unit apartment going up in the middle of a subdivision or something that seems weird. But at the same time, people who are trying to do things that are very ordinary, very much part of what else is going on in the community, or maybe supplying what's missing, like that Target you mentioned. And it's very, very hard to get it done. Even these projects that do get approved, it often takes an extraordinarily long time, and it all takes its toll. I mean, people want to know why does it cost so much to buy a home these days? Why is rent so expensive? And there's no single answer, but obviously a lot of these regulations, too much trouble trying to get things rezoned. All of these things make it really difficult. And then when you have states going towards rent control, boom. I mean, I heard an interesting statistic from Toronto. I want to say 90% of their apartments were built before 1970s. And you want to guess when they enacted rent control?
Right.
Exactly. I don't have to tell you twice. You know exactly where I'm going with that. But I think this build to rent, I think it's a very great trend. It's something we need. And just reading an article just before this about flippers, just saying it's so much easier just to flip this house rather than becoming the landlord. Forget it. We're just going to flip because there's enough landlords that just want to buy a turnkey property. And when rents are going up in some places like 20% a year, or maybe even better than that, if you happen to be in Tampa or some of the areas where things are just shooting up like nuts, that I can totally understand why you would be in there for the short term. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but maybe.
Yeah, and I think too, George, you know, I believe that rent control is a bad law for the tenant, really, and partly because the landlord is not motivated to add value to that property. You go through West LA, I'm in Los Angeles, and you go through some of these places that were under rent control, as you mentioned, maybe even some since then, since 70s, 80s, 90s. You know, it's changed the way that you feel and look and feel about that area. And it's not a tenant friendly, like, yeah, my rent's inexpensive, but I'm living in something that has never been improved. It's still, you know, walk up and you know, still torn carpet. And so it's bad for the tenant. So I think there is a happy medium, right? If you're adding, like, we don't push our rents unless we're adding value. That means, you know, new kitchens. I'm talking about on the value add multifamily now, just not to confuse people. As built to rent would be new stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But we've got to figure out a way to bless the communities too. It's not about us just keep increasing the rent. It means that we've got to have, you know, in one of our projects, we put apartment life, which is kind of like, think of an RA for apartments. So basically, you know, your college RA kind of is there putting together community events, barbecues, if they want Bible study, et cetera, et cetera. But there are also kind of, tenants are stickier when they feel part of a community, right? So we want to have those kinds of things. We just send our tenants, you know, Valentine's and ice cream days, things for the kids. All those things you can do and push rents, but you've got to be adding value. And so I thought it was interesting what you said when you're talking about areas like Tampa, and a lot of our neighbors in San Diego moved from San Francisco, Menlo Park, you know, in and around Silicon Valley, because, you know, it's out of control up there, right? And so at some point, it's going to be interesting to see the balance of rents and expenses, and without supply, without what we're trying to do, built to rent, it's going to be out of control. Like, you can't expect to have inflation on one side, push rents, and that same B or C class tenant who's paying $5 for gas and another 30% or 40% for milk, and just keep increasing their rent without adding value, because at some point there's either civil unrest or inflation's so out of control that you know, it's impossible to build new stuff, right? So I think that there's got to be a happy medium, but I think that it comes back to what is government's role in this? Is it impeding progress, or is it trying to help people that are doing the right thing, building the right thing, blessing these communities, to support them as opposed to becoming an impediment? And a lot of it, I know I'm going on a soapbox a little bit, but a political kind of political kind of convenience to blast a developer who's trying to build out these communities.
Well, here I'd like to take that one step further. So I've heard that the definition of an addictive substance is something that gives you an immediate benefit, but the consequences are delayed. That almost anything like that is likely to be addictive. And when we talk about politicians, rent control is obvious, right? The benefit is immediate, right? Hey, you don't have to pay so much in rent. It doesn't go up each year, but the consequences are delayed. It's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road that you see these impacts that, hey, maybe this is not such a tenant-friendly place. And whenever you can defer those consequences, especially if you're elected to a 2 or a 4 or a 6-year term, it's really easy to take something that has an immediate benefit, like inflation, for example, and say, what's going to be my successor that's going to have to deal with the problem?
Yes, that I think you hit it that on. I mean, I would challenge people to look at the studies of those areas of San Francisco, Portland, parts of LA where rent control was enacted, and see what happened. It wasn't that rent stayed where they were. Rents went and values went way up. But the other thing that happens is there's no inducement for developers to build anything if they cannot rent to value. So that's part of the reason we talk about this 3.5 million unit shortage that we're experiencing right now. So I don't know. We probably spent too much I'm always kind of cognizant of what audiences care about hearing about, especially that they probably came here for mindset, right? And then all I'm giving them is
That's
a bunch
good.
of belly aching.
We'll get to that mindset, I promise. So yeah, I would just, before we move on, I will say, yes, you need to judge a tree by its fruits. So it's not the intentions, right? The intentions of policy is always good, or at least it's good sounding. And then we really need to look, 10, 15 years down the road to figure out what's going on. And just one anecdote I'll give you. Yeah, you mentioned a lot of things you can do. Ice cream day for the kids, or popcorn, candy. What do you call that thing? The pink and the blue stuff, the cotton candy. Yeah, the kids love that. You bring in a machine like that. But, we also had like a Bible day. We brought in some evangelists and they loved it. They got some food and everything. It was a party, some music. Everybody came out. And it's amazing what you can do just by trying to build community like that. It's not all about pushing the rents, like you were saying. It's not all about reducing expenses. Another way to increase the NOI is just to make people want to reapply for their lease.
Reapply.
Costs a lot of money to turn the unit.
Yeah, I have this conversation with investors time and time. I would say not all the time, because most investors want to do the right thing. But they're like, why are you doing that with my money? Why Apartment Life? We did a oh gosh, I'm trying to remember, Ramsey Plus, a subscription. So we would give all the tenants kind of, it's a pretty comprehensive kind of money management tool that we give tenants. They can have their own coach, and obviously it helps us manage that they've got their budget in place and they can pay their rent, but it's also a personal growth opportunity for them. But for the people that think, why are you I want to invest my money into the charities that I want to invest, my retort to that is exactly what you mentioned, George. They stay longer. They tell their friends about it. They write good reviews. They take care of the people around them. And that's a stickier tenant. It's a better tenant for their community, and it's a better tenant for us, and it's a higher NOI for the investors.
Yeah, all very beautiful. So then probably should move on to some other things. Before we move into the mindset and the entrepreneurship and the leadership aspect, you did allude to some bad or difficult deals. And I think that there's a lot of value to that. My favorite quote on bad deals is that, they say a smart man learns from his experience, but a wise man learns from the experiences of others. So if you have some experiences gained either from missteps that you've made, or maybe from missteps you've seen made, let us know.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of interesting about how I got into this business. When my parents separated, when I just came home from college one day, my she's a mess, and she says, "Hey, look, I'm going to sell the house." She wanted to sell the house. This is it must have been 98, at the kind of right before the market was going up. She put it on the market almost out of spite. The mortgage was maybe $1,400. So the next day somebody comes in and buys it. I don't know, but maybe 300,000, let's just say. In that time, that was a pretty decent, it was like a middle class neighborhood, maybe 290, something like that. Today, that's probably over $1.4 million. Okay, so out of spite, she basically decided that I just don't care about this, right? And so I saw my parents. They had, when they were separated, when they were divorced, it was like $100,000 in debt, right? So we just had to figure out something. So fast forward a little bit later, I got into real estate. I was kind of thinking, wow, gosh, I can't believe that people have multiple homes or properties or opportunities. And I started to learn the game from the commercial brokerage side. And then I got to a point where I almost had this kind of irrational confidence that I could kind of do it myself. I decided to go out, start my first syndication. It was in Dallas, Texas. I did probably, George, everything wrong. Like now it's easy to see in the books that, there's some great books about syndication, etc. But I thought, well, I understand the spreadsheets. I understand the numbers. I understand how to run a business. I've got good partners. Why not? I can handle this from California. I didn't realize how much Texans hated Californians in general, because that's part of the reason here is like the broker didn't care much about what we were doing, and it wasn't a huge project. It was probably a couple $1 million project. But what I learned from that is, one, pick your partners carefully. Like I had gone in with a partner that I had known for a while. But I also didn't have control like I should have of the books, of kind of the asset management, right? We would ask a question, we'd get an answer, we ask for a spreadsheet, we get a spreadsheet. We didn't have, he was the RIA, he was the smart money guy. So make a long story longer, he ended up committing suicide, and I got calls from other people that he had worked with, and it turns out he had basically packaged our property with another property, sold it to a foundation, and then obviously when he was feeling the effects, he committed, when he was feeling kind of the noose or the walls closing in, he killed himself. Well, what did that mean for us? It meant thousands and thousands of dollars of legal fees and protecting, because of course the foundation is saying, hey, we own this asset, you don't. He had a separate bank account set up, the whole deal. I had friends in it. I had friends in this deal. I had my family in this deal, right? I thought I was the hot dude. So I spent a long time kind of paying off, legal fees, et cetera. And so it's not just about the partners, because I knew this person. I could basically second guess, maybe I made a mistake about who I choose, but maybe I should have seen some signs. But what I did have control about was, hey, there's got to be a team transparency in everything that you're doing with your investors, with your partners. There's got to be checks and balances. We are, I'm a God-fearing Christian, but we are all self-interested in some way, and so even the best of us falter in some way. So I learned tons of things from that. Property management, I didn't manage the manager well enough. I wasn't good with the communication. We did end up getting out okay, except we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal fees that could have been profit. So I don't know. Hopefully on your YouTube, maybe you can cut it down a little bit, the story, but
no, that's perfect. I'm not editing anything.
I think it's a tale of people to see that look, and that really did crush me to a point where not just the real estate side, right? But to kind of think about your human condition. You got all of your people in this thing that you're leading, that you think, oh, I can do this. And then you fell flat on your face. How are you going to get up and do that again? And how is anybody ever going to give you any money again? Right. So it took a long time for me to become even that person that was willing to go back and try again.
Well, let's bring it full circle. So you had to sue the foundation and say, no, wait a second, we really do own this. And now whatever happened at the end with the title, were you able to recover any money? Did you recover control of the property? What happened?
Yeah. So, I mean, very quickly, they kind of realized what had happened. I don't know if you want to say, that it was a good thing, but there were some other people that were burned in other ways. So I think the kind of credibility of this former partner had already been stained in such a way where people said, okay, that makes sense. There was probably some forged documents, etc. So very quickly it became understood that we did own the property after many years of legal fees. And it's another thing that I learned, George. Being in a situation where you're in a legal embattlement with whether it was a foundation or somebody else, but there's two or three parties, right? There was the RIA that has their interest in it. There's the foundation that has their interest in it. And we're kind of this small group over here who owns one piece of this asset that, was putting to this kind of fund of multiple millions of dollars of assets. It is almost a sanctioned blackmail when you get into these things. And why I caution people that you've got to pick the people that you're working with so carefully, because the foundation, they don't care about us, whether we did it or not. They need to keep us on the hook, because until they make a deal with the insurance company, which is going to be what would happen, and that did happen, they want to have us on the hook personally, right? And they could have private conversations and say, hey, look, you guys are free to go. You can sell your property now, et cetera, et cetera. No. You're embroiled in this mess. And so, and by our attorney's, admission, it's, hey, look, these guys have you guys. It is blackmail. You can fold up your LLC and potentially disparage your name, or you pay the fees, the legal fees, and wait it out. It's up to you. So I caution people that it's not just about what's right and wrong in many cases. It is about you kind of setting the table the right way, because you're going to be in some messes at some point, and you're going to have to fight through them, and it's going to be inevitable that these things will happen to you. But there's are things, like you just said, that I can learn from. I learned from my mom's mistakes. People have learned, young people have learned from my mistakes. I've got, hundreds of those. So anybody that's in the audience that wants to hear more, let me know. I'll be happy to share.
Yeah, that's amazing and very deep. So obviously a lot of lessons in there. Learn who to trust. Having control over investment is very different than having a non-controlling interest. And wow, just looking at all of that, I don't even know what to say. Sometimes it's hard.
You almost kind of wonder, like, what kind of idiot would continue in this real estate game who'd kind of been, through that fire. And I think it does come down to the people, right? It's the relationships. It's like, one, you got this loyalty that eventually you're going to have to make your family and your friends right in some way, whether that's coming out of your pocket or whether that's putting them in the next deal. But the other thing is, like, what other choice do you have, right? These things happen to you and you've got no other choice, right? I mean, I suppose you could curl up in fetal position and, die, or maybe take a couple weeks vacation. But at some point you're going to have to get out of bed and do something. And this is kind of what I love to do. And I cared about the people that I'm working with.
Right. So I guess that sort of dovetails with my next question, which is, what lights your fire as an entrepreneur?
Well, the thing that lights my fire about an entrepreneur is really the kind of the team building, right? You get to, as an entrepreneur, you get to choose all the people that you want to work with, right? Now it's not easy to let go some people that maybe you like that isn't as capable. It's not easy when your team feels one way about it, maybe 85% one way, you feel 55% another way, and you've got to kind of trust your instincts, right? There's obviously these difficult conversations that need to be had, but there is a kind of power in everybody being on board with the same mission. And for our case, it's kind of blessing these communities, right? That's kind of what we feel like we're called to do. I'm called to do. The partners that are way smarter than me, that work with me, the team that's way smarter than me that works with me, we're called to basically develop these communities, really want to add value. I think I mentioned the apartment life, the Dave Ramsey, like, we've got a huge opportunity as developers here to really bless these communities, right? And not just the communities, but the people that are around us that are working on them. So that's kind of what gets me up in the morning. Obviously I got 3 kids and I'm really involved in the church community. So that takes a lot of time. But isn't that, wouldn't you agree, George, like the power that you get from having a conversation with somebody else? Maybe you talk it out, maybe you get an angle that you had never thought about. And then actually achieving something together as a team. To me, I don't think there's much better. I'm sure that people that love individual sports might feel differently, but for me, I was always a team sport guy, and to me that was the kind of best feeling, right? Was achieving, because you remember together all of the kind of heartache and pain that you went through in order to get where you're going.
I certainly agree. I think the team building has got to be one of the very best aspects of being in commercial real estate. It's very different than that solitary sport you mentioned. 100%. Yeah,
when I was doing the brokerage, when I first started, that was part of the reason that I'd never felt like I could reach the potential, because you do have interaction, you interact with your clients, and you interact with other managers and other buyers and sellers, etc. But you never really kind of had that feeling like, hey, I doing this because I care about what the next guy is doing, and the next guy is doing this because he doesn't want to let me down, and we've got a common goal, and we're gonna go after it. So, anyways,
Awesome. Well, let's extend that team building aspect. I understand your team now is about 8. Tell us how you built that team and how you had to grow as a leader to be effective.
Well, I think earlier on in my career, I spent too much time on kind of top down leadership as opposed to bottom up leadership. And part of that reason was I spent a lot of time training people that maybe weren't as on fire about it as I was, right? And so you spend a lot of time kind of feeling like you're trying to coach just the inspiration to actually get stuff done. And everybody goes through lulls, right? We're humans. But I think from what I've learned is if I'm hiring the right people, smarter people, motivated people, ambitious people, self-starters, guys that care about what they're doing and actually creating great work, right? Then my job is really just what kind of resources can I give them in order to be successful, right? I can pick up the phone and I can give them my take on something. I can hopefully get our branding out there. I can hopefully take great care of the investors that we've got investing with us. But for the most part, it's about trying to figure out a way to prop up these people that are really the ones that are making things happen. And that's true in any organization, right? It's usually a few people in that organization that are making things happen. A leader is his job is not to control things. His job is to kind of put these people in positions where they can succeed. So that's something that I've kind of maybe as I've aged a little bit become better at, which was, a little less ego, a little more, just a little more solemnity about, hey, I know what I can do and I know what I can't do. And these people are fired up about doing some of the stuff that I don't like to do. What can I do to help them do that with me, I should say.
Right. I'm hearing letting go, delegation, and developing people. Sound like some major lessons that I would take out of that. Great.
And them knowing that you care, right? Them knowing that you care about it. So that takes one-on-one conversations. It takes people that are maybe going through it, and you're kind of, hey, look, we got to figure out a way to pick up the slack, right? And all these things sound like great, right? But they're not easy, right, George? We all know how any relationship works, and you all know that you've got failures that come up, and some people fall off because they can't deal with, I'll give an example. We recently had our project in Lafayette. We got that deal done, and then we had another one in Austin. And there was just some delays in some capital coming in, there's delays in some of the building, there's weather issues, there's all of these things. We've got weekly asset management meetings, and there's always people that are, frustrated. Some people just, they want things now. And so part of my job as a leader is to kind of explain to a younger person who's basically done nothing but succeed in the last couple of years because the market's been great. Hey, this is how life is. And that's easier said than done. I certainly wouldn't have listened to me at 25. So I kind of understand that part of it.
I love the humility and the self-recognition. It's hard.
Yeah.
Well, let's head into the lightning round. Tell us something about one of your real estate markets that most people wouldn't know.
Oh, Lafayette, Louisiana is the happiest city in America by Wall Street Journal. And I think it's probably because they drink and eat better than anybody else, but that's true. That's the happiest city in America, Wall Street Journal.
I love it. Makes me want to go out and enjoy some Cajun cooking.
Yes.
All right. Give us advice for your younger self.
Ooh, trust your instincts. I know this sounds simple too, but as you're building out your business, you're going to understand nuances of the market. You're going to understand nuances of the deal. You're going to understand nuances of the people, and experts, so-called experts, people that either manage you or try to give you advice, are going to think because of their experiences that they know what you're dealing with. And so for many times, I kind of deferred to the elder statesman in the room when I probably had more of that information than I knew, right? And I didn't trust my instincts. I was kind of waiting for other people to give me orders. Hey, try this or try that. And if I could do it, knowing that maybe that wasn't the right move. So I would say for young people, you know enough to get going. Like you can listen to this pod, you'll listen to a few more, you'll read some books, but you have enough resources to do this now.
What is the best real estate advice that you've been given or that you would like to give on this show today?
Oh man, I mean, it's probably heard many times before, but buy and die. Buy and die strategy is buy real estate. That means that you're going to have to early on. You're not going to be collecting as much fees. It means that you're going to have to make some sacrifices. It means that some of that money, we talked about immediate gratification. Investing doesn't give you that immediate gratification, but when you turn that 3 to 5 year cycle and you start seeing things turn over and you can get that money back working for you, either through a 1031 or even not through a 1031, maybe it makes more sense to not do a 1031, but get that capital back in another project that's giving you cost segregation and offsetting your capital gains on the sale. But keep churning, and it will happen. It's just inevitable. People don't think that it is, but it's not. What did Einstein say? It was like the eighth wonder of the world was compound
Supposedly
interest.
he said that, yes, that the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. He who understands it collects it. He who does not pays it.
Right. And who am I to tell Einstein that he's wrong? But I think he's wrong. I think it's compound leverage, right? Because it's actually the fact that we get to leverage the bank's money, our residents' money, everybody else's money. Wow, it still compounds on the backside. So anyways, I think that people need to think about buy and die.
Yeah, I love it. And anybody who doubts that, take out a spreadsheet, consider any rate of return, and then ask yourself what happens if you get taxed 20% every year or every 5 years versus getting taxed 20% at the end. And that compounding effect is quite amazing.
Yeah, and if I can just add one thing, I know we're probably running long here. I appreciate you giving me the time to spat on, George, but people don't think about all the ways that you can make money in real estate. That we talk about cash flow, and we talk maybe sometimes about appreciation. But then when you consider the hedge against inflation, which is such a huge one, when you consider depreciation, when you consider loan pay down, that 10% cash on cash that you hear about, or the 20% annual rate of return for a multifamily deal, all that stuff is only considering your cash flow and your back end. It's not considering all the depreciation. It's not considering the hedge against inflation. If you're out there and you've got a bunch of money sitting in your house right now, that's flammable by about 10% every year. So get that money out and put it in an investment that's actually yielding you something. Anyway,
make some money on the spread. All right, what's the worst advice you've ever received? Or tell us about a mistake. You told us about a lot of mistakes. You've been actually very gracious with your experience. A mistake that you'd like to help others avoid.
I would say get into bed too early. I think I've been guilty of this. I meet great people and I'm mesmerized by a relationship. I think you really do need to vet your partners and your operators. We have a pretty stringent now vetting process, that we go through. And I think that's a big part of it. Know who you're in business with. I think you'd be surprised, and nobody is flawless, right? There's always some people that will have. In fact, any operator that I interview as you're investing in our fund, or if I'm investing passively and they tell me that they don't have any black eyes, or that everything's been going pretty well, then I'm running. So that's what I would tell people, that there's got to be some there's got to be some kind of reasonable balance between what is an operator that's telling you the truth and what is one that's giving you kind of the flowery BS.
Name a book that's helped to forge you as a leader and as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I know your audience is different, but I've given this a lot on other pods, and I still come back to this book because I think it's so powerful. It's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. We talk a lot about leadership and mindset in the past, and think of this as like, I've already broken my business. Now, how do I fix it? Because that's how most of us start, right? We break our business, and then we don't never have the book about how to fix it. We've got the Rich Dad Poor Dad, which I love. I've got my son. I'm giving him $100 to read Rich Dad Poor Dad. But a lot of those books are on like what not to do. And this is about Ben Horowitz's experience with him and building his business and helping others build their business. And it's an incredible story. So that's one. And then the other one, I think Brian Burke, if you haven't had him on the show yet, that would be a good one. The Hands-Off Investor, one of the most comprehensive books I've read about underwriting and deal making. And I told him every pod or summit that I deliver, I'm stealing it. So he said it was okay as long as I give him some credit.
Amazing book, one I recommend myself. Andy, send us out with your favorite success-oriented quote.
I'm a huge fan of Coach Wooden. My dad was a basketball coach, and I spent a lot of my young life coaching. And I think the creed that he has, and I think it's actually his father, is make every day your masterpiece, be true to yourself. And that seems simple, but we all know whether we're doing the best that we can or we can't. Help others, read good books, especially the Bible is what he would say. Save for a rainy day, and then ask God for guidance each day and thank him for your blessings. That's what I would say, George.
Great and profound. Thank you so much for taking the time to come to talk to our audience today, Andy.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, George.